Silent Hill F is a third-person psychological horror game where you play as Hinako Shizumi, as a town is suddenly engulfed by a strange fog and bizarre red flowers. The game is available on Steam, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series consoles.
Hinako?
Sorry. What?
You trip!
Atmosphere. At its quietest, the fog that engulfs Hinako's town gives the game a feeling of unease. It's apparent that you're not alone in the fog. The wooden houses that loom out of it are just an eerie reminder, along with the recently abandoned family homes, of a humanity that's not around anymore. And as the game progresses, more and more of the town's humanity is covered in disgusting, pulsating flesh and spider lilies. Like it's all part of a giant organism that's swallowing it whole, devouring it. There are moments of relative calm in the environments, as well as moments of extreme discomfort as you walk towards the dense fog and hear screaming or gurgling coming from just ahead, with the game's eerie soundtrack playing a swirling vortex of creepy tones as you pierce deeper and deeper into the murky world. The town or fog itself doesn't feel as menacing as previous games, but it's still vaguely alive. The game is split between the decaying, corrupted town and the unearthly dark shrines. Perpetual night and holy structures exist in a vacuum of darkness, and the spiritual nature of these areas gives the otherworld a sense of the supernatural and an electric feeling as you creep through them. It manages to be tense, it feels uncomfortable and unnatural, but not all of the time, as what really stops it from slipping into dread or having that dreamlike quality is how often you're dragged into combat. You don't get very long to explore or soak in these environments before something starts attacking you, and the atmosphere vanishes as you deal with the game's enemies. In longer gameplay sessions, it becomes even more apparent that every few minutes the eerie loneliness of the town is being stolen by yet more combat. Even little things like the soundtrack stopping when you open the map screen, which you'll need to do a lot, can take you out of the atmosphere, even for a moment. It's frustrating, but the atmosphere always sneaks back in, it's never totally broken. And when it's there, it's still pretty eerie. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. The fog doesn't bring much in the way of terror, only really what lurks inside it. The monster designs are really fascinating, with the jerky doll-like feminine monsters, a literal family unit, and then the overweight or perverted masculine ones that do a good job with representing aspects of things Hinako despises. But the variety in terms of combat is a bit small. They have some eerie animations and can be pretty dangerous, but they're also the punchline to nearly every eerie setup in the game, with most jump scares really being a monster jumping out or attacking you. Which can get a little tedious. They do have some unique interactions sometimes, but it's very limited. The major thing that will either make or break the game for most people is going to be its combat, which doesn't really change as the game goes on, being a pretty clunky version of Souls-like combat with a stamina bar that can leave you vulnerable to the various overlapping attacks of different types of enemies all attacking at once. Some even bring back memories of Ornstein and Smaug. It also introduces weapon degradation and items that restore stamina, but very little of this matters because you can still run away from combat in most cases, if you're running low on resources. The combat never manages to be frightening, and doesn't get any easier as time goes on, with the game's RPG elements allowing you minor things like more health and stamina or greater dodge windows, which were already difficult to gauge. At its best, it's tense, and at its worst, it starts to bridge into frustrating, with you fighting the camera in narrow hallways, or not being able to see enemy attack patterns to know when to dodge them, though somehow I never managed to die in the game's combat. It also has some chase sequences which were a little confusing, with branching paths that weren't always obviously wrong, which led to most of my playthrough's deaths and most frustrating moments. Conceptually, some of the stuff presented in Silent Hill F is frightening, but most of the traditional ways it tries to frighten you don't really work that well at all. That's still one Harry Mason. Sound design. The soundtrack is full of incredibly diverse music. Traditional Japanese instruments like the shamisen do a lot of heavy lifting for the soundtrack, with unearthly choral wailing to back it up and fill your ears with more unsettling tones. It still feels strange but more down to earth, and on the other end of the scale the music can still have that totally alien sound to it, reminiscent of the older games. It's still melancholic and reflects a lot of emptiness and sadness, but also the feeling of fate and determination in its wild instrumentation.
It's hard to picture a tough girl like you crying.
That was a long time ago. Don't think I've cried since.
The sweeping, sad melodies on the verge of collapse, the soft pianos and synths are all very familiar tones to fans of the series. Though the soundtrack is dense, it's not constant, and the eerie silences you get as you walk off into the fog or the darkness are just as impactful, with the pulsating flesh sounds and the ripples of the water filling the air with little sounds only just perceptible. The sound effects themselves are again extremely well done and very raw, from knife-wielding enemies slashing into Hinako's chest to the sound of her pipes slapping against the fleshy monsters. It sounds realistic, if a little exaggerated for fun. The grunting and squealing of the monsters, along with the creaking of their joints and the sound of their footsteps, is done with such an attention to detail that it's impressive. The voice acting is probably better in Japanese, but the English voice acting was still pretty great. Hinako herself delivers a truly pained performance, and characters like Rinko were easy to despise, not only because of her dialogue, but the subtle inflections in her voice. The game's sound space is immaculate, with lots of environmental audio coming through the headphones brilliantly, and reverb came across stronger in the music and voice acting than any of the sound effects, but it's hardly a problem. Once again, the sound design really comes across extremely well, hardly a surprise when you learn who worked on it. That's 2 Harry Masons. Gore. The game's gore is really disturbing, and this time around there's quite a bit of it in the environments, but also several profound moments. From the spider lilies growing out of Sakuko's eyes in the game's opening to the transformation scenes later in the game, the monster designs are masked by the flowers, but some still show their grotesque forms, with the shuddering spawning monster covered in blood, grey flesh and breasts that spurt out more monsters in revolting pustules as though it's its only purpose. There's the red lilies everywhere, which give off the feeling of blood, as well as the growing flesh that comes along with it, dripping like viscera between the buildings. The game's grab animations too are unpleasant, with the doll stabbing Hinako in the chest, with the agonizing scream and the repulsive glowing monster licking her face with its disgusting tongue. It's all deeply violating, but none of it really compares to the transformation scenes, which play out like disturbing rituals. Silent Hill F didn't go easy on the gore and delivered a repulsive and scarring entry into the series. That's 3 Harry Masons. Story. After an altercation with her abusive father, Hinako Shizumi goes to town to spend time with her friends, when a mysterious fog sweeps into town, bringing red spider lilies and death with it, which immediately kills one of her friends. The game's story is really its strongest point, with Hinako's journey being laced with guilt and oppression, insufficiency and despair, from both the comments her friends make on her status as a woman, to the ingrained and enforced subservience to her father she both loathes and fears, being trapped in the confines of Japanese society in the 1960s. The way the story is told is deeply symbolic as per Silent Hill standards, with lots of subtle and not so subtle reminders about what the story is trying to convey, with feminism and the rejection of modern medicine being the most obvious recurring throughout the game's diary entries and cutscenes. Hinako herself has a journal that talks about things like enemies and puzzles, as well as explaining various aspects of Japanese culture, which is worth a read for anyone who wants to fully understand what some things mean, which is one of the game's weakest points, that it won't mean as much to a Western audience, but the book is there to rectify that, and it also generally helps that it's interesting to read. Lots of notes help you understand more about current events, as well as the lives and characters you don't see, like the town's doctor who was trying to figure out what was seemingly wrong with the town's residents and the monsters spawning out of nowhere, as well as the thoughts of your friends. But what really hurts the game's story the most stems from its endings. Unlike previous games where any ending was possible from the first playthrough, Silent Hill F locks you into one ending in the first playthrough, and it can be pretty unsatisfying and disregards a lot of the events of the game, which can retroactively hurt the experience. And the only chance to really get closure to the story requires you to play the game a second or third time to reach one of the more satisfying endings. The overall story is still very good and well executed, profound in places, and easily the game's strongest feature, and replayability is something to encourage, but some people will definitely find the game's ending to not justify the journey it takes to get to it. Making the final score 4 out of 5 Harry Masons. Silent Hill F still doesn't really feel like a Silent Hill game. It's close, and probably the best game in the series I've enjoyed since Origins. I didn't even dislike the combat, but I noticed little things like the amount of combat and the game's initial ending really tainted the experience and left me feeling more apathetic than I'd hoped. Again, I'd like to remind you, the whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I didn't take many red capsules, the consequences were unforeseen, and I advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the Middle of the Night. Peace.